you done now?
As they said in the film, Back to the Future, where we're going, we don't need roads.
Oh, Brad, what have you done now?
Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
My calculations are correct. When this baby hits 88 miles per hour, you're gonna see some serious shit. Next Saturday night, we're sending you back to the future.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Back to the Future, the podcast, the only podcast looking back in time at the greatest film trilogy of all time, Back to the Future. I am your friend in time, Brad Gilmore. Here we are. Season 4 keeps coming in hot. Today on the show, we have an awesome interview. Stephen Clarke. When I was putting together Back to the Future, the podcast, back in 2015, early 2015, everyone I talked to, when I would say, and this was after every interview, I'd say, hey, if you know anybody who would be a good guest on the show, let me know. Everybody would say one of two things. They'd say, hey, either reach out to Stephen Clarke from backtothefuture.com and see if he can help out, or he would be a fantastic guest. And I always wanted to have him on, and I think we were in touch, maybe a little over a year ago, we got in touch with each other. And then, finally we sat down to do this podcast. It was so great. I split it into two parts. Stephen Clarke, part 1 and part 2, back-to-back, here on Back to the Future, the podcast, Season 4. He is Stephen Clarke, the curator of the official website, backtothefuture.com, and he's a wealth of information. So enjoy Stephen Clarke. Stephen Clarke joins me right now on the podcast. Stephen, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you, sir?
Great. I'm excited to finally talk to you. It feels like a long time in the making, and we finally found the date and time where our schedules could come together in this space-time continuum. And
we were finally thinking fourth dimensionally today, so I believe it'll work.
We are. Well, so much to talk to you about. You are, I guess, the chief operator, I would say, of backtothefuture.com. And you've held that post for several years now. It's funny, when I started doing this podcast and reaching out to people to have on the show, I would always ask people, who should I get? And your name came up almost every time. And if they weren't saying interview you, they're saying get with you, and then he'll tell you who to interview. So it was one or the other. So it's awesome to finally get to speak to you. I guess we should start from the top.
Okay.
Where I guess when did Back to the Future first get on your radar?
First got on my radar the opening weekend. I did not see it on opening day, but opening day was July the 3rd, 1985, and I saw it 2 days later on the 5th. And back then it stayed in theaters quite a while, so I saw it multiple times. I believe I only saw it twice in theaters, but I really enjoyed the movie. It was a great, exciting sci-fi action adventure comedy. And I was, of course, I was a big Michael J. Fox fan at the time because of Family Ties. And I've told this many times before that I had no idea until I got into the theater that Christopher Lloyd was in the movie. And I was a huge Taxi fan.
Oh, nice.
And, the commercials that, Christopher Lloyd did not appear in the trailer. And so it was kind of a complete surprise when he popped out of the DeLorean in the Twin Pines Mall parking lot. And so that was, even a bigger thrill to know that Christopher Lloyd was in there. So, and I was, just like every child of the 80s, I followed all the Spielberg movies and everything that he put out. So it was a great flick, but it really didn't come upon my radar until a year later when it came out on home video. There's a great article in Starlog magazine that came out, I believe in July. It was July of '86, The movie came out on home video in late May of '86, and Starlog did published a great article by a late Imagineer, Walt Disney Imagineer. His name was Bruce Gordon, and he wrote this fantastic story, just more of an observation and theories, and it was called The Other Marty McFly, and the whole theory was behind that when Marty went back 10 minutes early, he created another Marty in another dimension. And so, I mean, it's a great read if you've never read it. And so when I read that, it just really captured my imagination and pointed out several things that I had not noticed in the movie when I saw it in theaters. And so I rushed out and rented a copy and spent the entire weekend with the pause button going through just almost frame by frame on old VHS. I mean, it was new at the time, but VHS recording. And so it was just one of those things that just really captured my imagination. And that lasted quite a while. And then, over time it dissipated a little bit until part 2 came out. And then that's when everything went into hyperdrive. So I've really not looked back ever since part 2 hit theaters. But this was all pre-internet. This was, back then all we had was bulletin board systems on CompuServe, and you could connect with people in a DOS environment, and it was post messages and print them out on this wide green and white green bar paper dot matrix printers, and I probably still have some of those in a file somewhere that these people that I met on these old bulletin board systems back in the late 80s discussing theories. And so Starlog magazine was really our internet at the time, because it was really the only place you could get information about the movies and what was going to happen and so forth. So yeah, that was what really grabbed my attention was that Starlog magazine article in '86, and when the sequels came out, it was a done deal. I was hooked for life.
So yeah, I've read that stuff about the other Martys and all the theories that are out there. But to go back to what you said. So what were some of the things that were pointed out to you, I guess, in that article that you had to go back and say, no, I got to see this?
Well, I don't know of any fan who really will truly admit that they recognized Lone Pine Mall the very first viewing.
Yeah.
I was one who did not. And so things like noticing that, things like continuity with the ledge broken towards the end of the movie, but it was not broken at the beginning of the movie, and things, just little details. And, I'm an old school programmer, so I'm very analytical and thinking. And so when you start giving me things like that, little puzzle pieces, all of a sudden my brain is going into motion and trying to figure out the solution and figure out the problem, put the puzzle together. So that article really, even though it was like only 3 pages long, it had a few little things like that really engaged my critical thinking skills and my problem solving skills, and me really, I've always called Back to the Future the thinking man's movie. And so it's one of those things that just really exercised my imagination.
Is it the thinking man's movie because, you can spend so much time saying, well, if Marty's here at this time, then there must be a Marty A and then a Marty B. Is that what you mean by the thinking man's movie?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the only other movie that I can recall doing that for me was also another time travel movie. It was the very first Terminator movie. Had a lot of that in it. But, for one reason or another, I've really never gotten involved with the Terminator movies. So, I mean, I love time travel and the whole concept of what if and so forth. So, but, a year before Back to the Future, Terminator 1 came out, and it had a lot of the same kinds of concepts of he went back in time, and his father helped him send him back in time, but he went back in time, and it's just all these kinds of things. And so it's that has always been an enjoyable concept to me, and I continue to enjoy it. I don't follow a lot of time travel. You know, a couple of years ago, we had a few time travel TV series, and I'm just drawing a blank on the names of them now. They didn't last more than one season, or I think the last season NBC did have one, and I followed the first 2 or 3 episodes, and then it just kind of lost my interest a little bit. And I don't follow a lot of network television, but another one that I did follow, and it only lasted one season, was the TV adaptation of the movie Frequency. It was on Fox a couple of seasons ago, and that's another time travel thing. And so it seems like time travel always captures my imagination, but it's got to be really well done, or I don't stay with it. And so it was definitely Back to the Future is one of those rare gems that just keeps me coming back more and more, but not every time travel series will do that.
Yeah, you know, time travel I think is just interesting in general, but you know, I agree with you. I actually saw it's on YouTube or something. There's some college professor out there who talks about Back to the Future's rules for time travel and how if time travel were an actual thing, the way that they did it in Back to the Future would be like almost the most accurate. Have you read stuff like that?
I've read some. I probably have not seen the video you're talking about, but yeah, I mean, I have read some of those types of things, but I stay so busy with the site that I don't spend a whole lot of time researching other people's theories and articles.
So you said that though, it was a year after the movie came out, you really got into it, and then when the sequels came out, it was all over for you. How excited were you when Back to the Future 2 in '89 was coming out? I mean, were you already? How much invested in the series were you? I mean, you were on these like little message boards you talked about. Had you started collecting and stuff like that, or where in your fandom were you?
Yeah, I had not begun collecting because really back then, before Part 2, there really wasn't anything to collect.
Okay.
There were a few things from Part 1, but I didn't really collect. At that time, I was a music collector. I really collected music at the time, and so I really didn't focus on Back to the Future as a collectible hobby. Part 2 came out, and there were a lot of items that came out that you could get at Toys R Us and KB Toys and whatever the toy stores that have all gone out of business here today.
Yeah.
But back in the day, you could go into toy stores and buy skateboards and model kits and remote control DeLoreans and things like that. And so I bought a few of those things, but I saw Part 2 on opening night. And so that, and again, because I kind of read, not really spoilers, but I did read magazine articles, specifically Starlog magazine, that had a lot of information pre-release that you could find out about. And so I knew up front that there were 2 movies coming out. I had no idea until I was sitting in the theater that Part 2 ended on a cliffhanger. And so it should have been obvious, but I just assumed it wrapped itself up, and then we had a whole nother adventure coming in Part 3. I had no idea it was going to just drop off, and it was one of those a silent no in the theater. But yeah, Part 2 I saw on opening night, and again saw it multiple times, and certainly did everything I could do to get my hands on magazine articles and whatever was available in bookstores at the time to read on Part 3. And so again, saw Part 3 opening weekend, and felt it, wrapped the series up really tightly, but I really was not willing to let that be the end. And so thankfully, a year later, The Ride came out in Orlando. And so that's really when I always call it my geek switch. Went into permanent own and never turned back off. And so when I went on The Ride, that was really this immersive experience where I could actually be a part of the movie and actually visit a location, because I had never been to California at that point and never had been to any of the locations where they film the movies or anything like that. But going to Universal and riding the ride in January of '92, about 7 months after it opened, was quite an experience. And so that was one of those things that kind of got me to where I am today. So
a couple questions off of that. So first, sure. you went to Orlando. You said to go to the ride, or Universal to go to the ride. Where are you located in the U.S.? You're from Alabama, is that right?
I am from North Alabama.
Northern Alabama. That's where my family's from. Decatur, Alabama is where my family's from.
I live less than an hour away from Decatur, Alabama.
Do you really? Wow. Look at that.
Absolutely.
Small world. Yeah.
My dad is from Decatur. He grew up in Decatur, Alabama.
No kidding.
So.
Wow. Yeah. My family's from Decatur. Grandmother grew up there. Her uncle was the mayor over there. So long family history over in Decatur.
Wow.
So.
Small world.
Small world. Look how Back to the Future brings us together. So I want to get to the ride in a second, but you said when part 2 came out, it ended on a cliffhanger. I've always wanted to know people who saw it in the theater, because I didn't get an opportunity to. When part 2 ended and it was a cliffhanger, how did you feel, and how did people around you, if you can remember, how did they feel? I mean, I heard some people were let down, some people were excited. What was your feeling when you knew it was a cliffhanger, or when you found out?
Well, I probably wasn't paying any attention to anybody else around me. My wife was with me at the time. A friend from church had gone with us, and so we certainly heavily discussed it after the movie was over with me leading the discussion. But, I think it was just more of a surprise for me, just because part 1 wrapped up so tightly and came to an end with a hint of what's to come. And part 2 just did not do that. Like I said, I knew going in that they had filmed parts 2 and part 3 together, which was at the time unheard of. It was just unprecedented that they would film 2 sequels at the same time, but simultaneously and consecutively. And so I certainly didn't feel ripped off. I certainly wasn't mad or upset. I was just, it was more of a shock that, oh my goodness, I've got to wait another 6 months to see how this ends. And so it certainly was a motivation to stay engaged. And that's one of the things, when I look back at the box office numbers for 2 and 3, and you see the decline in box office numbers between 2 and 3, and you see just how many people opted not to go back to see part 3 after seeing part 2. And that is a foreign concept to me, because, like I said, part 2 ends in a cliffhanger, and you think, if you've seen parts 1 and 2, and you know that there's a part 3 and it ends the trilogy, why would you not go see it? And so that's always befuddled me as to why the audience did not come back in equal amounts or even more, especially given the fact that part 2 came out on VHS and Laserdisc the day before part 3 came out in theaters. So that was kind of another marketing uniqueness, that here you've got a sequel that comes out on home video, and the very next day
you can see
you can see how it ends. If you didn't see part 2 in theaters, you can rent the movie and then see how it ends the very next day at the theater. So but yeah, I certainly was. It was a full theater. I know it was a sold out screening that I saw. I don't recall whether there was cheering. There probably was some cheering and clapping throughout the movie, but I don't recall. I don't recall any gasp or boos or anything like that, because it ended on the cliffhanger. I was more shocked and thinking, there's no way I can wait 6 months to see how this ends. So, but I did, and I survived.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember the first movie I think that I remember that did that when I was I think the Pirates of the Caribbean. They shot 2 and 3 back to back, And I remember that at the end of 2,
Yep.
it was a cliffhanger for 3. And for me, I was like, oh my God, I can't wait till, part 3 comes out. I mean, I can't wait. I mean, oh man, And so that, I think that would have been my reaction, but I always like to know what people think. So, and then part 2 comes out, part 3 comes out, and you're a Southerner like me. You probably are a little prone to a little Western. You like a little Western just like I do.
Oh yeah.
So, I mean, I know a lot of people were like, oh man, it's a Western. They've really jumped the shark on this. Did you think that when you saw it, or were you like, no, this is a great time period
I thought
to go to?
I thought it was a great way to encapsulate the whole series to end, because it just, I mean, it was just a perfect ending. I think the Western was just fine. And I growing up in the 70s and 80s, I did not follow Westerns that much myself. I saw a few John Wayne movies growing up, but Westerns were never certainly high on my list. But the fact that part 3 takes predominantly in Hill Valley 1885 certainly was not a disappointment to me. I know a lot of other people feel differently about that, but part 3 I felt captured a lot of the same magic as the first one. It ends happily. It really solves, wraps the whole thing up just fine. So I think part 3 gets a bad rap unfairly.
I do too, and I think that it's actually a more fun movie than the second one. And I think it was just a great way to end everything and to take us back to the past. But you couldn't go to, I remember like there was a plan to go to like the 1960s at one point. We saw the 50s,
right,
60s are a little more fresh. We want to see you go back before all of that. And I thought, 100 years was a nice round number. It just made sense to go back that far for me. And I thought it was a great way to end. When I would watch these films growing up on VHS or DVD, I always was partial the most. When I was a kid, I liked part 3 the most.
Okay.
I don't know why. It was just the most fun to me. And I don't know, maybe it was just the Southerner thing. Again, I just love the Western aspect of it, growing up on a lot of, Fistful of Dollars and all that stuff, and Good and Bad, the Ugly. And so, it was just, I thought it was a great movie. I really liked part 3.
Well, and I agree with you. I think the concept of somebody living in the Old West and having the ability to create electronics and refrigerators and repair vehicles and things like that in a time period where none of that is available. I like that concept, and so another film that is very similar is, and I know it gets a really bad rap. I must confess, I actually enjoy the Will Smith movie Wild Wild West because it takes place in the West as well. But they've got a lot of electronics, and I know that both parts, Back to the Future Part 3 and Wild Wild West, kind of get accredited for steampunk, and that I don't follow any of that. But I just I like that concept of electronics and so forth taking place, existing in a period where they normally would not exist. So,
well, I thought like it was a great thing for Doc. Like, what better way to handicap a scientist and an inventor than to put him in a time period where none of that exists?
Exactly.
What better way to have an arc for that character and to give him some motivation and figure out this conundrum?
Sure.
That's why I always thought it was just such a great idea to go to the 3. But I guess when you look though at all 3 of them and you look at 1, 2, and 3, for you, and I think everyone has the same answer, but for you, which of the 3 is your favorite?
Well, I get this asked a lot. I really can't, at this point in time, I really can't dissect them into separate movies. I mean, it is one complete adventure. It's a 6-hour epic adventure. And so I really don't pick them apart. I just last night and through today, TBS has been running
I was
parts 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And you're running part 1, you're running part 2 right after it, but you're not running part 3. Why not? And so it is.
I didn't get that either. But
entire story.
When I was watching it earlier, well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But when I was watching,
I just don't understand why a network would show parts 1 and 2 knowing that part 3 ends the whole thing, and I know they've got the rights to show part 3 because they've done it many, many times before. But I think this morning they ran part 1 and then part 2 and then reran part 1.
Part
again.
1. That's what I was gonna say. I was like, when part 2 ended, I was like, okay, here comes part 3, and then they reran part 1. I was like, what is going on? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah,
the programmers over at TBS.
I just don't. Yeah.
So it's one story for you. So not
it's one story.
Out.
I mean, you can't deny that the original is a modern day classic.
Yeah.
And, I've one of the things that I've been most proud about throughout the last 25 years that I've been involved with all this was a little over. Well, actually, it's been a decade ago. It's been 10 years ago this year that. This site championed the efforts to get the first movie included in the Library of Congress's National Film Archive, and so it's part 1 is preserved for all time throughout the rest of U.S. history through the Library of Congress, and we started that effort 10 years ago, and it. In 1 year, we got it included in 2007. So part 1, I don't think you can deny that it is a modern day classic, and the Library of Congress would agree with that statement. So, but when you look at it, when you look at the whole thing, the whole series is one story. So, they're all my favorite. So.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. Maybe make it a little easier. I mean, part 1, obviously, I think is just. If it ended there, which I'm glad it didn't, but if it ended there, it's like, well, that's just a near perfect film. And I'm not even saying that as just a massive fan. It's just like, there's nothing you can really go back and nitpick. In some movies, you're like, well, I didn't really like that, or they could have done without that, or whatever. This movie was so tightly wound and tightly knit, I should say, that you can't even nitpick it. But to go back to my original question, instead of what's your favorite movie, do you have a favorite time period that was traveled to?
I figured that was going to be the angle you were going with.
There you go.
Favorite time period has to be 2015, but my feeling is that we did not spend enough time there. So
really? You would like for them to be in there majority of the movie?
Yeah. Well, it would have been nice to have a little bit longer there. We jumped there really quick, and I'd have to go back and look at my notes, but we didn't spend but maybe a third of the movie in 2015. And so now that we are beyond that actual year, looking back, I don't know that it's still truly my favorite, but at the time when all 3 films had come out, 2015 was definitely my favorite because again, I'm a child of the 80s. I grew up, I graduated high school in the early 80s. And so the 80s were still very fresh on my mind when all 3 of these movies came out. And so anything that nostalgizes the 80s in 2015 and makes it very glamorous is, that's something that I enjoy. So.
No, I understand that. So you say 2015. I guess I should ask, whenever 2015 finally came around and we were there and we saw it and Future Day was upon us, how did you celebrate your Future Day? And were you also, follow-up question would be, were you also like just kind of surprised that a lot of the predictions came true?
When it came to that day, I was actually in Los Angeles with a lot of fans at the We're Going Back celebration. So I actually was at Universal Studios watching part 2 when the actual date and time hit. We were in the theater at City Walk at Universal Studios watching part 2 when it was actually 4:29 p.m. on October 21st. So that you kind of got to live that for one last time. So, but yeah, it's. And I'm sorry, I've just completely forgot what you just asked me.
No. About the second part was just how were you kind of surprised at a lot of some of the inventions that were come up with, like picture in picture, paying with your thumbprint, many others. Were you surprised that some of them actually came to fruition, other than flying cars?
Yeah, I'm not really surprised. Just through the website and pre-website, I used to write a newsletter and write about those types of things. thumbprints and all that kind of stuff I used to write about. So am I surprised? No, because I know Bob Gale real well, and he's just a very inventive and innovative guy. And so the fact that he wrote a lot of that stuff and came up with a lot of it does not surprise me that a lot of it has come into fruition and exists today because of his genius and the things that he wrote about. But at the same time, he kind of wrote a roadmap for other people to invent them in time as well. So I was certainly rooting for the Cubs that year to win, and they didn't, but they did a year later. And so there's a lot of things that Part Two prophesied, and a lot of it came true. A lot of it was close. And then there are a few things, like you said, flying cars that we're still waiting on. And but surprised, I wouldn't say I'm surprised. I think I'm elated that a lot of it has come true. And I think that's what a lot of the draw, certainly 2 years ago, a lot of the draw and the media attention was just, I expected a lot of people, fans, to kind of just to come back and rediscover the trilogy again. But I had no idea there was going to be such a media storm that month and that week and that day. So it was a nice surprise. It was everywhere. It was everywhere.
I mean, I walked into an office building, and then it was one of the coolest things, I think, as a Back to the Future fan, to walk into an office building in 2015, and on every little desk or every little couch setup, where in the waiting areas, everywhere had a USA Today with the cover, with the youth jailed cover on it. It was just like, where am I? Is this actually? I think for me, that was my favorite part of that day. Other than reliving the movies and seeing everything, to actually walk into a building and see the USA Today from 2015, that was pretty cool. More with Stephen Clarke on the next episode of Back to the Future, the podcast.
Oh, Brad, what have you done now? Oh, Brad, what have you done now?